So I had a negotiation that came out of nowhere, completely unexpected, when my car was not starting and I had to take it to one of Boston's Infiniti dealers. And they brought out a bill after the diagnosis for $1,700. And I was shocked. I was like, wow. Now, it included a bunch of things that I did not need. So I asked them to remove those. But I did need a new starter, and that was going to end somewhere between $1,300 and $1,400. We'll call it $1,350. It was so much money, I figured I'd investigate this price and try to negotiate it. So one of the things I had to do first was break the information asymmetry. What is making up this $1,350? So I started Googling the cost of starters for my car, and it turns out it's like $500 for the part. So I then went to his office, to the manager's office who was over the shop, and inquired about this pricing buildup, knowing that $500 is the materials. He said that labor was billed for 5 hours at about $160 an hour. So that's $800 plus the $500. That is $1,300, and my bill was like $1,350 with the other extra, with environmental fee, different things. Okay, so it makes sense. He agreed to not charge me an additional $150, so it would have been $1,500 for the diagnosis. So he took away the diagnosis fee. That's standard practice. I didn't really know that at the time, but he told me that. And what I figured that any leverage would be sort of on this labor side. It wouldn't be on the material side. Material is what it is. And he told me that my car would be ready in about 3.5 hours. When I first agreed to the work. So first what I had to do was learn about the pricing a little bit deeper now from other perspectives and sort of try to build a case for a discount. So I call my dad, who's a mechanic, and he calls our longtime friend who's a mechanic and says that it takes about 1.5 hours to replace the starter, not 5 hours. Then I call my Infiniti dealer back home in Philly and learn that they actually have a couple ways of coming up with these numbers. One is all data, another one is like the warranty, and essentially they're standard numbers, and that comes out to be about 2 to 2.5 hours. And I have one of the reps from my Infiniti dealer in Philly put together a whole email with all of his findings. This is how much, or this is how many hours it is. This is, a screenshot, right? All a sophisticated email. So I am pretty excited. I have the mechanics input. I have my Infiniti dealer's input. I'm armed and ready to, go back. And I want to set the tone emotionally and sort of anchor the conversation. So my dad suggested this, and I completely agree. He says, just ask him if he can check the numbers and make sure they're correct, right? Because I don't want to be confrontational. After all, he has my car in hostage, and he could do anything to my car at this point. So I end up sitting down with him. I forward him the email with the information, and he starts by basically saying that he can't rob the mechanic of his time. And I'm like, okay, the mechanic is a 20-year pro. He gets the work done really quickly. So while they can charge 5 hours, he actually does it in like closer to 3, but he can't penalize him for that because he's more efficient. He can't allot, he can't take that $800 allotment of labor and squeeze it down to like $500 because he's just more efficient, right? He's still got to get the shop still needs to get the $800. So he says the number in his system is actually different than the 2 to 2.5 hours. It's actually 3.2, and then he multiplies it by 1.5. So that comes out to 4.8. And so he insists, it's 5 hours. It's 5 hours. I then say, well, could you maybe talk, because he's bringing up all these other systems that he uses. I'm like, could you talk to my Infiniti dealer or Philly dealer back at home? And he's like, no. And he was getting agitated. And so at this point, I was like, I kind of just wanted to back off a little bit. I didn't want to kind of keep pushing and pushing and pushing. It was like it wasn't going anywhere. But he kind of blurts out of nowhere, look, I'll give you a $100 discount. You're a first-time customer. I value your business. So then I like go, okay. I just like say, you can't do anything on the labor side. And he's like, and it's like, no, it's like a non-starter. So I go, okay, great. Look, I agree with the discount. I'm really happy about it. Now, and I say, okay, yeah, like we shake hands. Now, this is where things get crazy. About 2 hours later, he comes out with a bill, and it's like $1,400. Now, remember, I'm expecting $1,350 minus $100 for $1,250. Okay. Now, I noticed there's a core charge for $7,500. And these bills, I have one of the bills here. This is the final bill. They're pages, a couple pages, and you got to scrutinize all the numbers. You got to go through all the numbers, or they're going to rip you off. And there's a core charge for $75. And I go, what is that? And he says, oh, it's a mistake. And he goes back and he brings out another copy of the bill. Then I noticed that labor is not $800, it's $864. And I said, oh, I thought it was $800. He goes, and he goes, oh, it's 5.2 hours. So 5.2 hours times 160 is 832, not 864. So I literally pull out a calculator on my phone, and I'm doing the math in front of him. And he goes, oh, I'll go back and fix it. So at this point, it's really awkward because it's like he's lying to me now, right? And I keep catching him. Now, the whole time I was very calm and professional, even though internally, right, I'm just like, what on earth? And I'm like, feel like I'm rolling around in a tub of slime because it was just so like, God, like you're lying to me. So he comes back at this point, and now he's just like, hey, why don't you look at the bill and like review it? Now he's just like putting it in my face, like, why don't you just review it? He kind of gets the point here that I actually am going to review everything. And I just look at it one more time. I'm like, okay, it's fine. And at this point, I just wanted to get out of there. And I realized that I should have insisted at that moment that you said it was 5 hours. Let's make it 5. And we started to vent a little bit to the cashier, and she was like, "You got to really fight for yourself and demand it. If that's what it is, you got to really demand that." Because it was clear that he was backstuffing costs in to make up for that $100 discount. I went back, I gave him a kind gesture. My final bill, this is it right here. It was $12.88 once I took the discounts out. So I saved about $75. I missed out on like the extra $30 that I should have gotten had I insisted that it'd be $800. So assessment here, really one, controlling my emotions, especially when I felt like I was being blatantly lied to. That worked well for me because he eventually was just like, hey, review everything, and very willing to change the numbers. The cashier was exactly right. I should have looked to claim value and showed some anger and frustration at when he shifted it to 5.2 hours up from 5 at the last second, when he didn't sort of stick to that quote. And I also could have played more on other emotions like, hey, I'm a student, and try to get mercy that way. One of the things I could have done better was find out what's important. So I didn't know about this whole mechanic thing and robbing the mechanic of hours. That it really was like a non-starter and something that ended up being really not negotiable. So I could have tried maybe just asking for like a 10% parts discount, or maybe like a $75 new customer discount, which is what I ended up getting. But I could have maybe asked for a discount on parts. Or maybe just ask for a 10% discount, period, and let him decide where he pulls the money from, or where out of margin he pulls it, however you want to look at it. The other thing I could have done was ask more yes-no questions. Oftentimes, I try to like make it easier for him to answer and kind of fudge and get away with stuff. I should have been more like, hey, are you willing to do a parts discount? Or are you willing to do any discount? And kind of put the ball maybe a little bit back in his court. One thing I learned too is the need to be nimble, especially when you're realizing that you're picking at a no compromise issue, as the labor thing ended up being, even though I'd done a bunch of research and clearly it seemed like that was an issue that I could negotiate on. And then last thing, I think I did this well, avoiding unproductive confrontation. Had I gone in sort of hot early on, he probably wouldn't have even suggested a $100 discount. So long story short, I got a discount, ended up paying less than the $13.50, and learned some vital lessons along the way.